There are memories that fade with time. Faces blur, voices soften, even pain learns how to lower its voice. But silence? Silence doesn't age. What I didn't say during her pregnancy still haunts me today. Not because I didn't love her, not because I didn't care, but because I believed love didn't need words. And that belief cost me more than I ever expected. If you're listening right now and thinking, I've lived long enough to have a few regrets of my own, then you already understand the weight of this story. Because this isn't about what I did wrong on purpose. It's about what I failed to do while assuming everything was fine. She was my daughter, my first child, the one who taught me responsibility before I ever felt ready for it. I raised her to be independent, resilient, capable. I taught her not to rely too heavily on anyone, not even me. So when she told me she was pregnant, I wasn't worried. I congratulated her. I told her she'd do great. I told her she was strong. Those words came easily. What didn't come easily were the questions that mattered most. I didn't ask how she was feeling when she lay awake at night. I didn't ask if she was scared of becoming someone new. I didn't ask if she felt supported or quietly overwhelmed. I assumed that if she needed something, she would say it. Let me pause here and ask you something. How many times have you assumed silence meant peace? Because I did. She didn't cry around me. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for help. And in my mind, that meant she was handling things well. But pregnancy doesn't always announce its struggles. Sometimes it whispers them. I grew up in a time where emotions were handled privately. You didn't burden others with your fears. You didn't talk about loneliness. You pushed through. So when my daughter became pregnant, I followed the only example I had ever known. I stayed practical. I talked about doctor appointments, eating right, resting when possible. I offered advice, not understanding. I offered solutions, not space. I told myself I was being respectful. I didn't want to interfere. I didn't want to hover. I didn't want to make her feel like I doubted her strength. What I didn't realize was that my distance felt like indifference. There were signs, quiet signs. Her calls became shorter. She laughed less. She stopped sharing small details, the kind of details people share when they feel emotionally safe. I noticed the changes. I just didn't respond to them. I told myself she was busy. I told myself pregnancy changes people. I told myself everything would settle once the baby arrived. Have you ever convinced yourself to wait, only to realize later that waiting was the mistake? That's what silence does. It makes procrastination feel reasonable. Sometimes when she called, there would be a pause, a small gap where it felt like she might say something else. And every time, I filled that gap with advice. I talked because talking felt safer than listening. I never said, "You don't have to be strong with me." And that sentence alone might have changed everything. Here's the uncomfortable truth. I thought emotional support meant fixing something. And since she never told me what was broken, I assumed nothing was. But pregnancy doesn't always break things loudly. Sometimes it cracks them quietly. There was one phone call late in her pregnancy that still replays in my mind. Her voice was calm, but tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind that settles into your bones. I asked about the baby. She said everything was fine, so I believed her. I talked about preparations, about plans, about what came next. She listened, then she said she had to go. That call ended faster than usual, and afterward, something changed. The distance didn't show up as anger, it showed up as absence. Fewer calls, longer stretches of silence, less warmth. At the time, I thought I was giving her space. What I was really giving her was proof that she was alone. I assumed there would be time later, time after the baby was born, time once things settled down. But silence doesn't wait for better timing. It settles in. By the time I realized something was wrong, the space between us had already grown wide enough to feel unfamiliar. And the most painful part? Neither of us talked about it because we were both waiting for the other to speak first. And that waiting would follow us into a moment neither of us was prepared for. The day the baby was born should have been loud. Phones ringing, voices overlapping, joy spilling out of every corner of the room. Instead, what I remember most is how quiet everything felt inside me. I was there, physically. I showed up, I held the baby, I smiled for pictures, I told everyone how proud I was. And yet, there was something missing that I couldn't put a name to at the time. My daughter looked tired. Not just the kind of tired new mothers feel after labor. This was deeper. Her smile came a second too late. Her eyes didn't linger on me the way they used to. I noticed it. And once again, I said nothing. I told myself she was overwhelmed. I told myself she needed time. I told myself that once she adjusted, things would feel normal again. That word, normal, has a way of lying to us. Because nothing about becoming a parent is normal. It's disruptive. It rearranges your entire sense of self. And if you feel alone during that transition, the loneliness settles in places people can't see. I visited when I could. I helped in practical ways. I brought food. I offered to hold the baby so she could rest. But emotional presence? That still didn't come naturally to me. We talked about schedules, feeding times, doctor visits, the baby's weight, the baby's sleep. Notice the pattern? Everything revolved around the baby. Almost nothing revolved around her. Let me stop here and ask you something gently. How often do we forget the mother once the baby arrives? We celebrate the life that came into the world and overlook the woman who had to become someone new overnight. I did that. She rarely complained, but when she did, it came out sideways. Small comments, half jokes. I guess this is just how it is now. I don't really sleep anymore. It's fine. I'm fine. Those words should have stopped me in my tracks. But instead, I nodded. I agreed. I normalized her exhaustion instead of questioning it. I didn't know that postpartum silence can be louder than postpartum tears. Weeks passed, then months. Our conversations stayed surface level, safe, polite. I sensed her pulling back, but I interpreted it as independence, as maturity, as her stepping fully into her new role. I was proud of her. What I didn't realize was that she had stopped expecting anything from me. And when expectations die, relationships change. One afternoon, I stopped by unannounced. I thought I was being helpful. I thought I was offering support. She opened the door holding the baby, her hair undone, her face bare. She looked startled. Not angry, just unprepared. I remember saying something casual like, "I was in the area." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Inside the house, everything looked fine, clean enough, organized enough. And that's when it hit me. She was still performing, still being strong, still holding it together. And I let her. I didn't sit her down. I didn't ask how she was really doing. I didn't say, "You look like you're carrying a lot." I commented on the baby. I always commented on the baby. At some point during that visit, she disappeared into another room with the baby for a while. When she came back, her eyes were red. I noticed, and once again, I didn't ask. Do you know how heavy that realization is later on? To know you saw the signs but didn't follow them? Silence can be polite. It can also be cruel. As time went on, our relationship became more distant, not because of conflict, but because of emotional neglect that went unspoken. She stopped calling as often. I told myself she was busy. She stopped sharing personal details. I told myself she was private. She stopped leaning on me. I told myself that meant I had raised her well. I wish I could go back and challenge those assumptions, because independence doesn't mean immunity to loneliness. Then came the moment I still replay in my mind like a paused screen. She called one evening, months after the baby was born. Her voice was shaky, not dramatic, just fragile. She said, "I'm just really tired." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. That was my opening, and I missed it. I told her it would get better. I told her motherhood was hard. I told her she was doing a good job. All true, all insufficient. What I didn't say was, "I'm here. Tell me what you're not saying." That call ended quietly. After that, the distance hardened into something permanent. We still talked, we still saw each other, but something vital had been lost. Trust, maybe, or safety. She no longer brought her exhaustion to me. She no longer hinted. She stopped reaching. And the cruel irony? I thought everything was fine because she had stopped expressing pain. Years passed like this. Life moved on, the baby grew, new routines replaced old ones, and on the surface, everything looked stable. But silence doesn't disappear. It waits. And it waits patiently for the moment you finally understand what it took from you. That moment came for me much later, in a way I never expected. And when it did, I realized the regret I carried wasn't about what I did wrong. It was about what I never gave her the chance to say. Time has a way of smoothing things over on the surface. Years passed, birthdays came and went, holidays were celebrated. The baby grew into a child, then into someone with opinions and preferences and a personality of their own. From the outside, it looked like we had adjusted. We showed up for family gatherings, we exchanged updates, we talked about work, about schedules, about life in general. But something had changed beneath all of that. There was a carefulness in the way my daughter spoke to me, like she was choosing her words the way you do with someone you don't want to burden, or disappoint, or rely on. I noticed it, but by then I didn't know how to name it. Our conversations stayed safe, pleasant, predictable. And that's when I realized something unsettling. I knew what was happening in her life, but I didn't know how she felt about it. That's a different kind of distance. Let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with it for a moment. How close are you really to someone if you only know the facts of their life, but none of the feelings? That question didn't occur to me back then. Back then, I was still telling myself we were fine. Then one day, during a casual conversation, she mentioned something that stopped me cold. She said, almost offhandedly, "I learned not to expect much from anyone when I was pregnant." She didn't say it with anger. She didn't say it to accuse me. She said it like a statement of fact, like something she had accepted long ago. I laughed lightly, made a small joke, changed the subject. But inside, something cracked. That sentence stayed with me. It followed me home. It sat with me in the quiet. I realized she wasn't just talking about that time in her life. She was talking about me. And suddenly, moments from the past began lining up in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. The unanswered pauses, the shortened calls, the way she stopped reaching. I started replaying those months in my head, not the way I remembered them, but the way she must have lived them. A young woman becoming a mother, her body changing, her identity shifting, her world narrowing and expanding at the same time. And me standing just close enough to say I was there, but never close enough to feel safe. That's when the regret started to deepen. Not loudly, not all at once. Regret doesn't always arrive as pain. Sometimes it arrives as clarity. And clarity can be brutal. I started noticing things I had missed before, how she rarely asked for help now, even when she clearly needed it, how she apologized for expressing frustration, how she minimized her own struggles before anyone else could. Those habits don't come from nowhere. They come from learning early on that your needs won't be met. I had taught her that lesson without ever meaning to. And that realization hurt more than any argument ever could have. I wanted to talk to her about it. I really did. But how do you bring up a silence that lasted years? How do you apologize for something you didn't do, but should have? So, once again, I hesitated. I told myself it was too late, that reopening the past would only cause pain, that she had moved on. But had she? Or had she just learned to carry it quietly? Then came the day she said something else that cut even deeper. We were talking about parenting, about how she approaches her own child emotionally. She said, "I don't want my child to ever feel like they can't come to me." She said it firmly, intentionally. And in that moment, I understood something painful. She had built her parenting philosophy on what she didn't receive. That doesn't mean she hated me. It means she adapted. And adaptation often comes from unmet needs. I sat there, listening, nodding, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." I wanted to say, "I didn't know." I wanted to say I should have done better. But the words didn't come, because silence had become our language, and breaking a language you've spoken for years feels impossible. That night, I went home and sat alone with my thoughts. For the first time, I didn't tell myself excuses. I didn't say I did my best. I didn't say I didn't know any better. I just allowed myself to feel the weight of what hadn't been said. And that's when I realized something terrifying. Regret doesn't come from mistakes alone. It comes from missed chances. And I had missed so many. But I still didn't know whether it was too late to speak. Because sometimes, by the time you find the right words, the other person has already learned to live without them. For a long time, I carried the urge to say something like a weight in my chest. Every visit, every phone call, every quiet moment after hanging up. The words were always there, right behind my teeth. "I'm sorry. I should have been there differently. I didn't realize how alone you felt." But each time I thought about saying them, fear stepped in first. Fear of reopening something she had worked hard to close. Fear of hearing how much I had hurt her. Fear of confirming what I already suspected. So I stayed quiet. Again. And there's a special kind of regret reserved for the moments when you recognize a pattern in yourself and still repeat it. That realization alone can keep you awake at night. I started noticing how careful she was with me emotionally, how she kept things light, how she redirected conversations away from herself. She laughed easily, but it didn't linger. She shared updates, but not feelings. And the more I noticed it, the heavier it became. One afternoon, I found myself rehearsing what I might say if I ever found the courage. I imagined sitting across from her, telling her that I hadn't known how to show up emotionally during her pregnancy, that I thought giving space was respect, that I thought strength meant not needing reassurance. I imagined her nodding or crying or getting angry. I imagined all of it. But imagination is safer than reality. Reality requires vulnerability, and vulnerability was something I had avoided my whole life. Let me ask you something quietly. How many times have you wanted to apologize for something that happened years ago and convinced yourself it would only make things worse? That's the lie silence tells us. Then came a moment that took the decision out of my hands. It wasn't dramatic. No confrontation, no raised voices. It was something she said in passing. We were talking about a difficult time she had gone through recently. She described it calmly, almost detached. And then she said, "I didn't tell anyone. I just handled it." The words landed heavily, not because of what she said, but because of how familiar it sounded. That was me. That was how I had raised her. And suddenly I saw the full shape of what my silence had taught her. I realized then that if I didn't speak, I would be complicit in passing this pattern down another generation. That thought scared me more than any uncomfortable conversation ever could. So, the next time we were alone together, I didn't let the moment pass. My heart was racing, my palms were damp. I felt foolish for being nervous over words I should have said years ago. I started slowly. "I've been thinking about something for a long time," I said. She looked at me, surprised, attentive. That alone told me how rare this kind of conversation was between us. I told her I had been thinking about her pregnancy, about how I hadn't asked enough questions, about how I stayed quiet when I should have leaned in. I told her I thought I was giving her space, but now I see I was withholding support. My voice shook, not because I wanted it to, but because truth has a way of undoing your composure. She didn't interrupt me. She just listened. And that scared me more than anger would have. When I finished, there was a long pause. The kind of pause that stretches time. The kind that makes you wonder if you should have stayed silent after all. Finally, she spoke. And what she said was not what I expected. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry the way I imagined she might. She didn't list everything I had done wrong. She just exhaled, a slow, tired breath, like someone finally putting down a weight they'd been carrying for a very long time. Then she said, "I didn't think you noticed." Those 5 words hit me harder than anything else she could have said. Not, "I was hurt," not, "you failed me," not, "I needed you." Just, "I didn't think you noticed." That's when I understood how invisible she must have felt back then. She told me she never expected perfection. She never expected me to have all the right words. She just wanted to know she wasn't alone. She told me that during her pregnancy, she felt like everyone cared about the baby she was carrying, but no one cared about the woman carrying it. She said she didn't want to sound ungrateful, she didn't want to seem weak, so she kept everything inside. And when I stayed quiet, she took that as confirmation that her feelings were something she had to manage on her own. I listened, really listened. And the more she spoke, the more I realized how much she had edited herself around me for years. She said something that broke my heart. I learned to stop reaching. That sentence stayed with me long after our conversation ended, because stopping reaching is not the same as healing. It's adapting. She told me she didn't resent me, that she understood I did what I knew how to do, but understanding doesn't erase impact, and that truth sat heavy between us. I apologized. Not quickly, not defensively, not with explanations, but fully. I told her I was sorry for the silence, sorry for not asking the hard questions, sorry for assuming strength meant she didn't need reassurance. She nodded. She accepted the apology. But acceptance doesn't mean instant repair. Trust doesn't rebuild itself in one conversation. What changed that day wasn't everything. What changed was the direction. After that, I started showing up differently. I asked questions and waited for the answers. I resisted the urge to fix. I let her be vulnerable without rushing to smooth it over. And slowly, something softened between us. But here's the part people don't like to talk about. Even after healing begins, regret doesn't disappear. Because regret isn't just about the past. It's about knowing how much earlier things could have been different. I still think about who she might have been during that pregnancy if she had felt emotionally held. I still think about the nights she cried alone while I slept, believing she was fine. And that's a weight I will always carry. Let me speak directly to you now. If someone in your life is pregnant, or hurting, or quietly overwhelmed, don't wait for the perfect words. Presence matters more than precision. You don't have to fix anything. You just have to ask. Because silence teaches people how much they can expect from you. And sometimes, they believe it. There are moments now when my daughter reaches out in ways she never used to. Moments of honesty, of openness. I treasure them. But part of me will always wonder how many moments I missed before I learned how to listen. And if I could go back to that time, back to her pregnancy, I wouldn't change everything. I would change one thing. I would speak, not to advise, not to instruct, not to correct, but to say the words that should never be assumed. You're not alone. Because silence may feel safe in the moment, but its echoes last a lifetime. After that conversation, I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before. Not just in my relationship with my daughter, but in myself. I realized how often I had used silence as a shield, how many times throughout my life I chose distance over discomfort, how I convinced myself that staying quiet was the same as staying respectful. It wasn't. It was familiar. And familiarity can be dangerous when it goes unexamined. I began tracing that pattern back further than my daughter's pregnancy, back to my own upbringing, back to a time when emotions were something you managed privately, when asking for reassurance was seen as weakness, when love was shown through duty, not dialogue. No one ever sat me down and asked how I was really doing, and I never thought to miss what I never had, until I saw the cost of passing it on. My daughter didn't blame me. That almost made it harder, because blame would have given me something concrete to respond to. Instead, she offered understanding. And understanding doesn't erase responsibility. It deepens it. I started paying attention to how she parents her own child, how she asks questions, how she creates space for feelings, how she reassures without smothering. She learned that somewhere, just not from me. That realization stung more than I expected. There were moments I felt proud of her. and moments I felt replaced. Not in her life, but in her emotional world. She had built something healthier from the absence I left behind. And while I admired that, I also grieved it. Grief is strange like that. You can grieve something you never meant to lose. As time went on, our conversations changed. They became slower, deeper, more honest. She still didn't share everything, and I didn't expect her to. Trust doesn't rush back just because the door is finally open. But I noticed something important. She no longer apologized for her feelings. She no longer softened her struggles to make me comfortable. And that told me we were moving in the right direction. Still, there were nights when regret crept in quietly. Nights when I wondered how many other moments I had misunderstood in my life. How many other people I had assumed were fine because they didn't complain. Silence had shaped more than one relationship, and I began to understand something crucial. Silence doesn't just affect the person who needs support, it changes the person who withholds it. It teaches you how to stay distant, how to avoid vulnerability, how to remain untouched. And that kind of distance becomes lonely over time. Let me ask you something, and really sit with it. Who in your life might be interpreting your silence as absence? Not because you don't care, but because you haven't said otherwise. We tell ourselves people know we love them, but knowing and feeling are not the same thing. I learned that too late. Even now, years later, I still catch myself holding back words that matter. And every time I notice it, I try to stop. Because I know what silence costs. It costs closeness. It costs connection. It costs moments you don't get back. I don't share this story because it ends perfectly. It doesn't. There are still gaps between us, still moments when I wish I had been braver sooner. But there is also something else now. Awareness. And awareness, while painful, is the beginning of change. I can't rewrite her pregnancy. I can't give her the support she needed then. But I can make sure my silence doesn't shape the rest of our story. And if you're listening to this and thinking about someone in your life you've stayed quiet with, don't wait for regret to teach you what presence could. Because silence is easy in the moment, but it's heavy in memory. As the years continued to pass, I started to understand something that took me most of my life to learn. Love doesn't disappear because of silence, but it does change shape. It becomes quieter, more cautious, less demanding, and sometimes less reachable. My daughter and I had found a new rhythm by then, a gentler one. Conversations with more space, more listening, fewer assumptions. But I could feel the past sitting between us. Not loudly, not angrily, just present, like a shadow that lengthens in certain light. There were moments when she would share something personal, and I could tell she was measuring my response, waiting to see if I would truly hear her. And every time I sensed that hesitation, I was reminded of the trust I had to rebuild slowly. Trust doesn't return because of intention, it returns because of consistency. That realization made me look at other relationships in my life, friends I had drifted from, family members I spoke to out of habit rather than connection. I wondered how many of them had also learned not to reach for me. Silence, I realized, doesn't isolate just one person. It isolates everyone involved. One afternoon, I was watching my grandchild play, laughing freely, expressing frustration without apology, asking questions without fear. And I felt a sharp ache in my chest. Not envy, grief. because I suddenly saw how different things might have been for my daughter if she had felt that same emotional safety during one of the most vulnerable times of her life. I thought about how pregnancy changes more than a body. It changes how you see yourself, how you see the world, how you measure support. And I had been present without being available. That distinction matters more than we like to admit. There were moments I wanted to bring it up again, to apologize once more, to revisit the past. But I learned something important. Apologies are not meant to erase history. They are meant to acknowledge it. And sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is not reopen a wound, but make sure you never cause it again. So instead of revisiting the pregnancy, I focused on the present. I checked in. I asked how she was really doing. I stayed in conversations even when they made me uncomfortable. I learned to sit with feelings instead of redirecting them. That didn't make me perfect. It made me present. Still, late at night, the questions would come. What if I had spoken up sooner? What if I had asked one more question? What if I had said, "I see you," when she needed it most? Those questions don't have answers. They just have weight, and you learn how to carry them. Let me talk to you directly now. If you are a parent or a grandparent or someone who loves deeply but quietly, silence may feel like respect, but love needs witnesses. It needs words. It needs reassurance, especially during seasons of change. Pregnancy, illness, loss, transition. Those are the moments people remember who stood close and who stayed quiet. I learned that lesson late. Not too late to change, but late enough to regret. And regret has a way of sharpening your awareness. It makes you listen harder, speak sooner, hesitate less. It teaches you that time is generous, but not endless. There will come a day when the opportunity to speak no longer exists, and on that day, silence will be all that remains. As I grew older, the weight of what I had learned began to settle differently. It wasn't as sharp as before, but it was deeper. Regret changes with time. At first, it feels like pain. Later, it feels more like responsibility. I couldn't go back and change who I was during her pregnancy. I couldn't step into those months and become someone emotionally fluent overnight, but I could decide who I would be from here on. That decision didn't come with grand gestures. It came with small, intentional moments. Calling without a reason, asking questions and waiting for the answers, saying, "That sounds really hard," instead of, "You'll get through it." Those changes felt awkward at first, unnatural. Growth often does. My daughter noticed. She didn't comment on it directly, but I could feel it in how she spoke, less guarded, more present. Not because the past was forgotten, but because the present was finally safe. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. It's not approval, it's not erasure, it's not pretending something didn't hurt. Forgiveness is deciding not to carry bitterness forward. And my daughter did that in her own way. She didn't excuse my silence, but she didn't let it define our future either. That was a gift, one I don't take lightly. I also learned that forgiveness doesn't remove regret. It simply changes what you do with it. Instead of letting it turn into shame, I let it become awareness. Awareness of how easily people can feel unseen. Awareness of how much emotional safety matters. Awareness of how silence, even when well-intended, can wound. I started talking about this with others my age, friends, siblings, people who had grown children, and I was surprised by how many nodded quietly, how many admitted they didn't know how to talk about feelings. How many said they assumed their children would tell them if something was wrong? How many carried their own quiet regrets? Silence, it turns out, is generational. We inherit it the same way we inherit habits and fears. But inheritance doesn't mean obligation. Patterns can be broken, even late. One evening, my daughter said something that stayed with me. She said, "I'm glad we can talk like this now." She didn't say, "I wish you had done this before." She didn't need to. The past was already written. What mattered was the present. And that's something I had to learn to accept, not as a consolation prize, but as a chance to show up differently, a chance to be emotionally available now, a chance to model something better going forward. I can't change what my daughter experienced during our pregnancy, but I can change what she experiences with me today, and sometimes that has to be enough. If you're listening to this and carrying your own regret, let me say this clearly. It is never too late to soften. It may be too late to redo certain moments, but it is not too late to change the pattern. Silence doesn't have to be your legacy. You can decide that today, and that decision, quiet as it may seem, can ripple further than you realize. As I sit with this story now, I understand something I couldn't see before. Life doesn't always give us dramatic turning points. Sometimes it gives us quiet realizations that arrive too late to fix everything, but just in time to change something. That's what this has been for me, a quiet reckoning. Not with my daughter, but with myself. I used to believe that love was proven through reliability, showing up, providing, being steady. And while those things matter, they are not enough. People don't just need you present in their lives. They need you present in their feelings. During her pregnancy, I was steady, but I wasn't emotionally available. And that absence left a mark neither of us fully understood at the time. I've replayed those months more times than I can count. The moments when she paused on the phone, the time she said, "It's fine," and I let it be. The quiet spaces where I could have leaned in but didn't. Those moments don't scream at you when they're happening. They whisper. And by the time you hear them clearly, they're already part of the past. I want to speak now to anyone listening who is standing at the edge of a similar silence. Someone you love is pregnant or hurting or going through a change you don't fully understand. And maybe they seem strong. Maybe they're not asking for help. Maybe they look like they're managing it just fine. Don't let that fool you. Strength is not the absence of need. It's often the result of unmet needs. If I could give you one thing from this story, it would be this. Ask the question, even if it feels awkward, even if you don't know what to say next, even if you're afraid of opening something you don't know how to fix, because asking tells someone they are seen, and being seen can carry someone through their darkest seasons. I used to believe silence kept the peace. Now I know it often postpones the pain. There are still moments when my daughter and I sit together in quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet now. It's chosen. It's comfortable. It's no longer heavy with things unsaid. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because someone finally spoke, and I wish that someone had been me sooner. If you are older now, looking back on moments you can't redo, I understand that weight. I carry it too. But regret doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of awareness. And awareness, when acted on, can still heal something meaningful. There will always be moments we wish we handled differently. What matters is what we do with that knowledge once we have it. Silence taught me many lessons, but it doesn't get to write the ending. I do. And so do you. There is a certain kind of quiet that comes with age. Not the uncomfortable kind, not the heavy kind, but the reflective kind, the kind where memories line up without being invited. In that quiet, I think often about the version of myself I used to be. Not with anger, not with shame, but with honesty. I see someone who loved deeply but didn't know how to express it. Someone who believed restraint was respect. Someone who thought providing stability was the same as providing safety. I know better now. Emotional safety doesn't come from silence, it comes from presence, from asking questions you don't know how to answer, from staying when things feel uncomfortable, from letting someone be seen without trying to correct them. If I could speak to my younger self, the one standing on the edge of her pregnancy, I wouldn't lecture. I would simply say this: say something. Not the perfect thing, not the smartest thing, just something honest. Because words, even imperfect ones, create bridges, and silence builds distance. I don't tell this story to dwell in regret. I tell it because someone listening right now might still have time. Time to ask, time to listen, time to show up differently. And if that's you, don't wait for a sign. Don't wait for them to break. Don't wait for them to ask. Reach first. You might think they already know you care, but knowing is not the same as feeling, and feelings are what carry people through their hardest seasons. There are things I didn't say during her pregnancy that I can never take back, but there are things I say now, and those words matter. They matter because they say, I see you. They matter because they say, you don't have to be strong alone. They matter because they say, I'm here. That is the legacy I choose now. Not silence, but presence. And if this story leaves you with anything, let it be this: speak while you still can, because love deserves a voice.